I am going to kick us off. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Sabrina Zarifi, and I'm the Senior Manager of our Step Ahead program. I'd like to welcome everyone to our July Solution Series, Beyond the Resume, Making Military Skills Visible Across the Talent Lifecycle. A couple of quick notes before we start. This session is being recorded and we'll share the recording afterward. Please drop any of your questions in the Q&A box or the chat. We've saved the last 10 minutes for Q&A and we're going to get to as many as we can. So in today's webinar, we are going to dive into military connected talent and how it isn't an untapped pool because the skills aren't there. It's untapped because those skills aren't fully visible. When someone transitions out of the military, an employer usually gets a short resume, a few lines, a job that doesn't map cleanly to anything on their org chart. What they don't see is the years of training, the certifications, the leadership under pressure, and the millions of federal dollars that were invested into developing that person. Most of that is hidden. So, the question we're looking at today is what if employers and candidates had the tools to make those hidden skills visible in a way that's easy to understand, easy to trust, and usable across hiring, onboarding, career growth, and retention? So that's what we're going to be exploring with two people who are doing this work every day. Now, I'd love for the audience to get to know who they're hearing from. So, to our speakers, can you share your role and the experience you bring to this webinar and what makes this work matter to you? Satis, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and spending your lunch hour, depending on what time zone you're in, with us. I'm Satis Gaib, and I lead special projects here at the Manufacturing Institute. And I have the pleasure of working as part of our Heroes Make America initiative, which is our military to manufacturing work. My background before I joined this team has really largely focused on workforce and economic development. And specifically, I worked on a couple of very large projects supporting military transition out of Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State. My husband was active duty as a part of the Special Forces Unit First Group there at Joint Base Lewis McChord for about 10 years. And so we had a lot of geographic stability that you don't often get when you're in the military. And through that work, I had an opportunity to work alongside business and industry in building better connectivity and bridges into the military installation, as well as helping those transitioning and finding employment. And what brings me to this work, what I'm so passionate about, over those years, a lot of things became clear to me. While I could see and knew from working directly one-on-one with service members and with employers, there was a lot of alignment between what someone did in the military and what someone could do as they transitioned to their civilian career. But there was really no standardized way to translate military experience and training line for line or in exact language that employers could recognize and know at scale. And so much of that work was very manual. It relied on a lot of trust and relationships between folks that were sort of brokering those referrals. And it was really difficult. And I saw so many over the years. I worked with over 1,000. And some had it a little easier than others, but many really struggled. And that really lit a fire in me. There has to be a better way. We've come so far with technology. There's a lot of desire to better connect and to hire our military connected talent. And so that's what really drove me to this body of work here at the Manufacturing Institute, was to really help solve for some of those larger systemic issues that I saw through the years working at Joint Base Lewis McChord.
Great. Thank you so much, Satis. Next, we will have Lauren introduce herself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the Manufacturing Institute for inviting myself and allowing me to represent SOLID, or Solutions for Information Design, on today's call. My name is Lauren Ronco Bevilacqua. I am the Vice President of Innovation, Strategy, and Delivery at SOLID. For more than 2 decades, the SOLID team has worked alongside the Department of War and the services to support the military-connected community with understanding and trying to maximize the value of what they've learned throughout their military careers. My work really sits at that intersection of military learning, workforce development, and technology. Every day, we work with military training records, credentials, occupations, and employers to answer a pretty simple question. How do we make military earned skills understandable and valuable outside of the military? We hear folks talk all the time about, we know, as Satis mentioned, the military is providing one, it's the largest education and training provider in the world, the Department of War, along with the largest employer in the United States. And they are investing so much money and time into service members, ensuring that they're getting this high quality training and education and experience. And we just don't always know how to equate that in civilian terminology. A lot of times it's semantics. And so I think what makes this work really meaningful to me is that I've seen firsthand just how much talent is hidden behind military job titles. Similar to Satis, I'm also a former military spouse. My ex-husband was an 11 Bravo. He served in the infantry. He actually was stationed in Washington, D.C. and was in the Old Guard. And so it's for those on the call that are familiar with various roles inside of the military, being an infantryman in the Old Guard, working in Arlington Cemetery is a really unique role. And it's really hard to articulate the skills that they're acquiring and how those then translate to opportunities in the civilian sector. And so when he got out of the military and I joined him in that transition, folks really were trying to put him in just security roles. They didn't understand and what he could really do and all of the skills that he acquired through deployments and just all these different roles that he held outside of the job title. And so we often talk about veterans as, again, this untapped talent pool, but I don't know that that's entirely accurate. The talent isn't untapped because it doesn't exist. It's really untapped because employers don't have the best way to see it in an actionable way. So I'm going to, before we kind of get into the questions, Sabrina, that you're going to ask us, speak to some of the key words that we're going to talk to today, just so that we can level set with everyone, because we're going to use terminology that might be the first time you've heard it. And so just making sure as you're hearing us talk about these things, you've got a reference that you can go back to at a later time as well. So for the purposes of the conversation today, when we say military connected, we're really talking about a variety of individuals that can be under that umbrella. So we're talking about active duty service members. We're talking about National Guard, which is in every state and territory in the United States, reserve members, veterans, military spouses, and in some contexts, military caregivers and surviving family members. So this is a large population of people. And I think sometimes we get stuck in the idea of, well, it's active duty service members. It's much more than that. And they are all bringing similar experiences to the table that should be recognized accordingly when they're looking for new opportunities. Military rank. Military rank is a designation of a service member's level of authority, responsibility, and leadership within the military hierarchy. Rank reflects organizational position and experience, but does not necessarily indicate specific occupational skills or technical expertise. So a lot of times when we're looking at, and we'll talk about this more as we get into the conversation today, when we're looking at rank, I think folks try to take that as a proficiency level and it's not always the right way to think about it, because every service member's experience is unique. And the training they're receiving is also unique based upon the role that they've been put in and whether or not that's documented somewhere. The Military Occupational Code, the MOC, or you'll hear MOS used interchangeably as well. MOS is more commonly heard when Army is talking about their roles inside of the service. So it's a standardized code used by the military to identify a service member's occupational specialty or career field. Each military branch uses its own classification system. As I mentioned, MOS in the Army and Marine Corps, Air Force Specialty Code, AFSC for Air Force, Navy Enlisted Classification, and NEC, and then a Coast Guard rating. These codes describe occupational assignments, but do not represent fully an individual's complete knowledge, skills, abilities, certifications, leadership experience, or specialized training. Military title specialty is another one. The title is really what's associated with that military occupation or duty assignment. So like I mentioned, infantrymen, we've got logistics specialists, aircraft maintenance technician, just to name a few. While the title identifies a primary role, it does not often capture the full range of technical skills, certifications, leadership's responsibilities, specialized experience, and so on that individual has acquired during their military service. Skills-based hiring is another thing we'll talk about today. It's a hiring approach that really evaluates a candidate's a candidate based on their demonstrated skills, competencies, and ability to perform the work, rather than relying on another type of indicator like a degree, a job title, or years of experience. Digital skill badge, we'll talk about those as well. It's a portable, verifiable digital credential that represents a specific skill or a grouping of skills. They can be shared electronically and provide employers with trusted evidence of an individual's capabilities. And then finally, underemployment is another term that we're going to talk to. We hear pretty consistently that the veteran population has a lower unemployment rate compared to the rest of the eligible employees that are out there or the talent pool that's out there, but underemployment comes in significantly higher for that military connected population. And so that's a situation in which an individual is employed in a position that does not fully utilize that education, the skills, the training that they've received, and is working maybe fewer hours than desired, or it's just a mismatch between the talent they're bringing to the table and the role they're being asked to perform. And so military connected individuals, as I mentioned, they often experience this at a higher rate compared to their civilian counterparts. So just wanted to kind of level set with folks, and I'm sure we'll be sharing these slides out after, and folks will be able to engage with this information then. So thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Lauren, to help us level set on those things. So, before we talk about solutions, let's spend a minute on the cost of the problem. When skills aren't fully visible, what does that actually cost a manufacturer? And I'm not asking just when it comes to hiring, but all the way through the life cycle. So, this includes onboarding, internal mobility, promotions, and retention.
Yeah, I'll start with that question, and then if Lauren has something to add from our work together, I'll let her chime in as well. Broadly, I think we often underestimate just how expensive invisible skills really are. We know that turnover can cost 3 times someone's starting salary to replace, which is certainly a gut punch dollar figure. But when we peel that back and look at the causes of turnover, there are quite a few. But one of those key factors is role fit for both parties, and not having a clear visibility into what someone knows and can do is a large contributing factor to that. And when employers can't clearly see what someone knows and can do, they make decisions with incomplete information. And this has been something that has sort of flawed our recruitment and talent practices for a long time. But this is something that is only going to continue to get magnified, especially as we automate certain things, as less and less time and energy is spent reviewing sort of that initial pass of a resume. But more importantly, this issue really affects every stage of the talent life cycle. So again, this isn't a new problem, but in a tighter labor market or for hard to fill roles, it becomes really costly. It often starts with hiring qualified candidates. They get screened out because their experience doesn't match the language in a job description or the filters an applicant tracking system is functioning on. And then onboarding becomes longer because employers assume they have to reteach skills or teach skills employees may already have. In the case of our military connected candidates, those skills were developed in a different context, but can easily be contextualized at a faster rate if they're better known. And internally, people are overlooked for promotions because sometimes managers know their current job title, not necessarily the full range of capabilities they've developed over the years of work outside of their current employment. And so when we think about the veteran context, the veteran use case for this, if they were hired in a role initially, their skills weren't overly visible at that point of hire. They were in a role that wasn't commensurate with the depth and breadth and years of experience that they have. That's where we get into that underemployment piece. And we do know that service members experience an underemployment rate of almost 3 times higher than their civilian counterparts, which is really significant. And so when we think about then that internal mobility piece and sort of the cost of invisible skills, when you're coming in, you're underemployed. We often see almost 45% of veterans churn out of their first role within that year, which leads to that bigger retention issue because of large in part that skills visibility challenge. And so we know this impacts retention, obviously within our military connected candidates, but this is something that can apply to really any population. People leave when they don't see a path forward. And underemployed or bored because they're underemployed. And even though organizations already have the opportunities they could succeed in, if their skills were more visible or acknowledged, they could have been recognized internally for some of those career pathway opportunities. And so I think one of the biggest opportunities we have is to fix this with tools and strategies that surface the skills people have and document that better, both for the individual and for hiring managers internally. And this is something that needs fixed both during the hiring process, but also as we dig deeper into those potential hidden skills of current workers and how do you assess fit for roles along a certain career pathway. And this really makes better use of the talent we already have invested in, which is, our most expensive and important asset that we have as employers. And so I think, this is sort of the direction that we're really trying to support this movement in, especially as we think about the opportunities and advantages that shifting more towards a skills-based hiring model can provide.
Great, thank you. And when you were speaking, it sure made it sound like manufacturing has a talent shortage, which we constantly hear about in this industry. How much of today's challenge is actually a visibility problem and not simply a problem, a
Yeah, I
supply
mean,
problem, sorry.
yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone on this call or anyone we talk to in manufacturing would argue there isn't a real talent shortage. Manufacturers absolutely need more workers. But I do think we've spent years treating this almost exclusively as a supply problem and certainly billions of dollars, in developing and expanding training, which is absolutely something that we need. But we also need to fix some of the skills visibility challenges that we have as well, so that as we're investing and upskilling and building this talent, we're being good stewards of that talent all across the talent life cycle. There are thousands of qualified people whose capabilities just aren't recognized because we really don't have good ways to identify skills beyond resumes, job titles, or in our service members' case, military occupation specialties. And we have veterans whose like leadership, maintenance, quality, logistics, troubleshooting, safety, operational experience, it doesn't always translate into language or job titles that employers are used to seeing. Sometimes that experience or those skills are sort of buried into military jargon, or it's in a context on a resume that maybe is hard to put yourself in if you've never been in the military and you're not used to maybe the type of context or environment that those skills were honed in under pressure in a deployment in Iraq or Afghanistan. And so we also have incumbent workers who have learned new skills on the job that were never documented anywhere either. How many of us have worked sort of outside of our job title or have learned a new skill or adopted a new software that may have never been on your job description? It might never end up on your resume. And so, when we think about going into a new opportunity, it's sort of going back into the archives of, okay, what have I done? And so many of those skills that would be a huge advantage when going after a promotion or even being evaluated by, HR for, internal promotion, mobility opportunities. A lot of those skills continue to be invisible. And so a lot of this assumption of a talent shortage, yes, we do have a talent shortage, but in many cases, we also do significantly have a talent visibility problem. And we have to remember to solve for both of those challenges. Not just one. And so, really developing strategies to better understand the incoming talent that you have, as well as your current workforce, is key to success here. And one thing I'll highlight here on this slide that's up. There are a variety of unique obstacles that our military connected community faces when they're transitioning from active duty and becoming civilians. Translating their military skills to a civilian role. I mentioned there's really no standardized way to translate military experience and training into a civilian context. There are plenty of military occupations that do crosswalk well into civilian roles. They have a civilian sort of counterpart occupation, but there are many, many that don't. And there are also many, many service members that work outside of their military occupation and role. My husband would be a great example. He was a 35 Mike, which is a human intelligence specialist. And he graduated his advanced technical training school with, I think his class had like 100+ people in it. And he was one of the only individuals that actually went to his unit and went on to go into advanced training and actually did the military intelligence job on an everyday basis. And he got millions of dollars worth of advanced training to really hone that craft. And many of his counterparts ended up with that same MOS, that military occupation, never really doing that job. And so you have to be very careful when you're over relying just on that military occupation title to draw assumptions around what someone knows and can do from the military. And that often leads us to the underemployment and career mismatch that I mentioned. Veterans, they often take jobs below their skill level due to a lack of recognized proof. We all reach a point, this isn't exclusive to veterans, but we all reach a point where we need a job. And if we've been in the labor market, we've been applying to hundreds of roles and we're not getting those callbacks, you're more likely to take the first opportunity that's offered to you, whether it's a really great fit or not for you personally. And so that's often what we see within our military candidates, is that they reach a point where, they absolutely have to take the first job that they're offered. Also, there's challenges really in navigating credentialing pathways. Many veterans are unaware of all the credentialing opportunities that are available to them, sometimes while they're on active duty, as well as, how they can leverage their military experience to get credit for prior learning. Much of their experience aligns well to civilian credentials that we have in manufacturing. They might have all of the skills and the aptitude, they just haven't necessarily sat for the test. And so sometimes if those are certain requirements, there can be a gap there, and that leads to them being filtered out. And then there's also misconception on both parties between employers and service members, and sometimes hiring bias. Sometimes there are assumptions of, well, you were this in the military, that means you can do this. Well, not necessarily. And so further investigation, conversations have to happen to make sure that this is the right fit. And so often we're making hiring choices very quickly if we have a shortage, or very qualified candidates are being filtered out either by an ATS system or really on that frontline recruitment process, because there's risk. It's not always as clear how their military experience does align. And so moving them forward might be more risky than someone coming directly from industry or a closely aligned adjacent industry. And so those are some of the real barriers that we see our military community facing when they're transitioning and looking for civilian employment.
And if I could just add one additional point that I think is relevant to the conversation, is just the fact that this is not just something that civilian manufacturing employers are experiencing. I think the Department of War really sees the need and understands the supply talent shortage, or the visibility shortage that is supporting that supply talent shortage. And so they've stood up programs like Project Patriot Pipeline, which focuses on really helping service members across the board have a better understanding of the opportunities that are out there, with a specialized focus on the defense industrial base, submarine industrial base, shipbuilding, maritime, right? These areas that are very relevant to the manufacturing world. They're actively trying to make sure that they are upskilling individuals in the services so that they can then turn around and, upon transition, be able to step into these real high quality roles that are meeting a need for our nation, right? And so this is just to kind of give everyone on the line an understanding that this isn't just something that the civilian sector is looking at. It's something that internally to the Department of War and the services are also trying to address, both to recruit talent in to address these things, but also to ensure that as folks are transitioning out, we can put them into these high quality jobs and identify the skills they have, so there's less of a gap when we're trying to place them in roles. So again, not relying just on that military occupation title, but really getting an understanding of the skills they have. So if we can put them into these roles that are in need, right, for civilian employers in the manufacturing industry, then you all have a better understanding of how you can train to the gaps that might exist versus having to start over from scratch in some instances.
Great, thank you. Um, as you guys talk about more about the valuable skills that manufacturers already have, can we can you talk a little bit more about what we're overlooking? So what are some of the most valuable skills that manufacturers already have, whether that's in their applicant pool, whether it's with their current employees, and maybe they just don't recognize them?
Yeah, I can speak to some of the gaps on the military connected side. I think we tend to focus a lot on technical skills because they're a little easier to identify. But some of the highest value skills manufacturers tell us, me, that they need are actually kind of combinations of both technical and what we would call durable skills, often referred to as like softer essential skills. So, for example, troubleshooting and root cause analysis, that definitely has a technical component, but very much also a durable skill that's sort of an innate aptitude that's honed over time based on lived experience and certain training. Risk assessment is another one. Safety leadership, team leadership, process improvement, decision making under pressure. The pressure, decision making under pressure in the context of our military community is often maybe on a deployment or a very time sensitive mission that they were carrying out locally within their unit. That may not be as visible or contextualized in a way that employers understand on a two-page resume, but very much aligns to some of the types of decision making under pressure when it comes to getting a line back up and running and being able to troubleshoot and determine the root cause analysis for that. And so those are some of those really valuable skills that are difficult to find that we do see very often in our military candidates. Communication is another one it's big. It's trained on a lot in the military, and we need that in the civilian sector as well, especially in manufacturing when we think about again how we're communicating across shifts, how we're communicating as a team lead, and different things like that. And so our veterans, our military connected candidates, they develop these skills every single day, often in incredibly complex, high risk operational environments. And so the challenge really isn't whether they have them. It's really how are those skills being communicated in a way that employers immediately recognize without and also acknowledging that none of us necessarily have the time to really take a deep dive into resumes. And even when we do, often it's not always clear and evident on that paper that they have that experience. And that's why translating experience into verified and understandable skills is so important to help solve for some of that challenge. And Lauren, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I'm going to advance to that next slide because I think that might be something we want to briefly kind of address. This gets into a little bit about what you shared, Sati. So I don't know if you want to add anything based on your response here to what we're kind of
Yeah.
showcasing.
Yeah, so we mentioned early on that, and it's very common, these military occupation codes to industry occupation codes or standard occupation codes known as SOC codes. These translation tools have existed for a very long time. And I am here to flag that they have gotten us about as far as they're ever going to get us, and they really miss the mark. They can be okay indicators if someone I'm seeing a hand clap. They can be okay indicators if someone is really hey, I was at this in the military. I really don't have any clue what that might align to, and that can somewhat be useful for employers as well. However, it really does pigeonhole someone into, okay, you were an 88 Mike, which is a truck driver. You can be a truck driver out here. Well, no kidding. But what those crosswalks really fail to recognize is the transferable skills that someone has that live outside of that direct occupation, and that job description that the crosswalks typically use and pull and parse data from. And the other harm in really over relying on those, as I mentioned in my husband's case, and he is certainly not the exception to the rule. He worked, he was one of the few that actually really worked and excelled and expanded his work within his military occupation. But so many of his peers and colleagues that he went through that initial training with carried that occupational title, but they did not really do the caliber of or the depth and breadth of what he did every single day. They may have touched on it when they deployed, but their day-to-day job looked very different. And there are plenty of service members that do that, their military occupation code. They do that in their day job and on deployment every single day. But there's really no way to tell when you're really relying on those crosswalks what the case was for that individual unless you're talking with them and peeling back that onion. The other challenge is it really narrows the list. And so, one message we never want to send, and I know all of you on this call because you're spending your lunch hour with us, we never want to say thank you for your service, but there's not a whole lot out here for you. And when someone puts in their military occupation, I've tested a bunch of them. I like to use my husband as a guinea pig, but I'll pull out a few other military occupations that I know are rife with transferable skills that are often misunderstood, and I'll play around with them. And what I often see is it'll spit out, okay, you can do, these three types of jobs. And then what it will say is you are 50% qualified for it, or you're 20% qualified for it. Or sometimes even worse, with one I was recently playing around with, I put in let's see, a 35 Delta, which is essentially a field combat medic. They can basically do field surgery for special forces. I put that in to one of those military occupation crosswalks, and it literally spit back out that there was no alignment in the civilian sector within that particular state, that healthcare was one of their main industry sectors. And what that tells me is there is a significant issue with the way skills data is being extracted and parsed within these types of translation tools. And so thankfully, I was the one doing it. I didn't have a lot of emotional tie to the occupation I was putting in, other than the fact that one of those individuals is the reason my husband came home from a deployment once. And so I can certainly attest and validate to their medical skills. But if that were my occupation as a service member, putting that in, seeing that my home state or the state I was looking at relocating to had nothing for me, I would feel really, really defeated. And so in many cases, those tools do a bit more harm than good. They can be an okay frame of reference, but there's something that we should not overly rely on to attest to what someone knows and can do. And Lauren, feel
They,
free to add anything.
yeah, I was actually going to jump in and ask Lauren, like from where you said it's solid, does that match what you're seeing across the broader workforce?
Absolutely. And I think that's why the Department of War and the services have invested in trying to address this with various types of tools that are out there. One of which is a tool that is in partnership between the Navy and OSW, focused on career pathing and helping a service member better understand what they know and can do, linked to their unique experience. And so there's a platform called MilGears that's out there. It's milgears.osd.mil. I can drop that in the chat later. And that's a way for individuals to upload their unique service records that have some of this detail included and see what they might match to, right? It gets us away from that one-to-one matching too, where we say, okay, again, what these MOC to SOC crosswalks do, this is your occupation in the military, this is your occupation that it aligns to in the civilian sector. We step away from that and we really look at the whole person, right? Here's an aggregate of all of these things. How do we help them understand where they fit? Because about 2/3 of service members, and I'll say military connected in this instance too, don't necessarily want to do what they did in the military in the civilian sector once they transition, right? So how do we help them understand that their occupation actually crosswalks to a variety of different opportunities with the skills they've developed, and that again, the government and our taxpayer dollars have invested in, right? That we have made sure that they are trained. And so how do we help them then continue to bring that training and that high quality knowledge and experience they have back into our communities, because we want to be able to tap into that talent too. And so I guess that's kind of what we're seeing across the board. We've seen a lot of movement in this way, again, through investments that have been made by the federal government through legislation and policy that's come out to push on these issues as well. But I think we still have a ways to go, but the foundation is there. It's about making sure we have conversations like today to make this information more well known, the resources that are out there more accessible, so that we aren't, again, relying on what might have got us to today, but instead looking at what's going to take us to the future to really address the challenges that we're talking about with that making skills more visible, making sure that we're attacking the supply chain shortages, right? So that's my kind of 2 cents in that.
Thank you, Lauren. Now, as we move forward with rethinking how we evaluate talent, the stories that we've heard make the impact really tangible, but also raise an important question. If an employer wants to better understand the skills already inside their own workforce, where do they even begin?
Lauren, do you want to speak to that a little bit and then I can jump in?
Yeah, do you want me to advance to the
Yeah.
next slide? Sure. All right. So there are a number of, like we said, there's a number of different initiatives, tools, things that are coming to fruition or have been around now for a couple of years that are continuing to expand and get better. And one of the ways that we're really trying to address this, and this is where Manufacturing Institute has really kind of paved the way, as an industry association, stepping up and saying, hey, there's a challenge here that we need to address. And that challenge is very much focused on making sure that we can, again, make skills visible to employers and help the service member, the veteran, the National Guard reservist, map them into these roles based on what they genuinely know and can do. And so when we look at tools like Map My Future, that's where we really start to explore how do we take that military experience and training, put it into a language that's more digestible, but for both the individual, right? How do we help the individual better understand what they know and can do so that they can more effectively articulate that, utilizing language that's going to resonate during an interview. And so that's where this work comes into play. And so the workforce challenge that we've spent a lot of this conversation discussing was around really how do we take all of the things that are happening in that service members experience. And again, a lot of this is not unique to military either. I think it's the use case that we're presenting today because it's very relevant and it's the world that we spend a lot of time in, Satis and I. But there's a lot of lessons learned that transcend military that can apply to a variety of different populations who don't have maybe the traditional learning pathway to get them into the role, right? And so we think about how do we make sure that we're not overlooking these candidates, that we're addressing the fact that they might be struggling to describe their experiences in a way that's going to make them feel valuable and also make the employer understand that they are bringing all of these to the table. And then how do we open up doors, right? So we're not, again, doing that one-to-one. You did this in the military, therefore you can do this in the civilian sector. Regular traditional civilian employees are experiencing that same issue. I do this job right now with this particular manufacturer. How do I open up pathways to myself to with another manufacturer, maybe in a different type of role that's still going to rely on those skills? And so Map My Future starts to kind of dig into this a little bit more. And again, through the partnership with the Manufacturing Institute, we worked with employers, industry as a whole, to say, okay, what are the skills that are really needed to do this type of a job? Now that we have that information, let's look at the variety of skill taxonomies and ontologies that are out there. So this is where you'll hear ONET, Lightcast, these different agencies that are pulling together common language to describe these competencies that someone might have, and then map them back to the experiences and training that a service member is receiving on the job. And so if industry is saying this skill cluster is needed to perform this role, then and this is the criteria that an individual needs to meet. Now we got to look back and see, okay, can we say with confidence that this person who came out of this occupation had this specific training, at this specific rank can say, yes, I have this skill at a foundational level, right? Because I think we've got to start somewhere. And that's really what the Map My Future experience has focused in on. We want to make sure that we're, again, leaning into AI because we'll continue to hear AI. Today, I think somebody said the other day, this is the slowest we will ever be. When we look at AI every day, we're going to get faster and faster and faster. But we still have to make sure that the skills intelligence, the way that we're feeding this information, it's routing through experts. It's routing through folks that understand the information and know what it means. And so we can't just rely on AI on its own. We need to rely on AI plus those subject matter experts that can say, yes, this information that AI is giving us is correct, or no, it's not. We need to make some changes to it. So that's where that human validated results comes in. We have those industry endorsed credentials that we just talked about that the Manufacturing Institute really paved the way on. They're saying we agree that this is the skills needed based on the conversations we've had. We are agreeing with the mapping that's happened, that's been AI informed and subject matter expert stamped of approval. And we feel comfortable saying we endorse that this is a correct skill credential that we can then put out and help employers make sense of. So they have another way of addressing that challenge that currently exists with crosswalking the information or the skills language. The defense industrial badge, or I'm sorry, this defense industrial base alignment piece of all this is really important too. We mentioned that earlier, that's really a prime time, high interest area for the federal government and for manufacturing as well. And then finally, we want to enhance those existing military ecosystems. So things like the MilGears platform I mentioned earlier, skills can help make someone's record of learning that they have an experience that they have just much more richer. So they know how to talk about it and they can also then give that information to an employer and they know what to do with it. I don't know if we want to maybe go into the next slide here, just paying attention to time, but just so you all know, the platform itself is just mapmyfuture.com. You can go to it now. It's live. You can have your current employees that are military connected go through and collect badges that are out there, as well as any new talent. If they identify as military connected, encourage them to go to platforms like MilGears or Map My Future so that you can provide them with additional information they can then lean in on when they're coming in and applying for jobs and interviewing for opportunities. And again, for those incumbent workers that might have that military experience as well, they can use this so that as they're thinking about their future, you can go ahead and say, okay, well, I see you have these skills. I never realized that you have these skills. Let's actually talk about these other opportunities that might exist in the company that fill a need for the manufacturer, but also allow the individual to have another pathway to consider. So again, looking at why it matters for service members, for the Department of War, for civilian employers. I don't have to read all of the information on here. I think it's pretty obvious, but it's just another way to make skills visible and actionable. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle that we need to continue pushing on.
Thank you, Lauren. Because of time, why don't we answer one more question and then we will head into some Q&A. So after seeing Map My Future, can you share an actual example or a moment where making military connected skills visible changed the outcome for an employee or a service member?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. And actually, if we want to go to the next slide, I'll show you an example of how this solution. So to reiterate, the Manufacturing Institute really invested in this work because we wanted to solve for two things. We wanted to build a better tool and better mechanism for service members, whether they ever came through some of our more formal, like skill bridge training programs that we host through Heroes Make America. We know that not everybody can go through those due to time and seat limitations. We wanted a way to impact any and all veterans and transitioning service members to let them know that you have skills that we need today in our industry. Here's what they are, and we value you. And so we wanted to bring more awareness and alignment between military experience and training and the manufacturing industry writ large. We also wanted to de-risk and reduce the burden for manufacturers to have to sort of manually translate military experience, jargon, some of those hidden skills that are buried under confusing occupational titles and rank. So into a signal, which was that badge. And so those are really the two key things we were aiming at. We also wanted to better streamline for our employer partners, really getting military candidates through that front gate by building more confidence on exactly how their skills aligned. An example that I have up here on this slide was actually they're not the only. We have many manufacturers that have leveraged these tools and adopted these processes, but Anheuser-Busch was the first. One of their big challenges was that they, would have military connected candidates come through. They would meet them at hiring events. They would talk to them about opportunities. They would go to apply, but man, they were not seeing them in the interview pile. And upon further investigation, so many of them were just being screened out because when you have 100 applicants for one role, you're going to go with the top 10 that are the least risky for alignment. And very often, those top 10 applicants were not the military connected candidates because they didn't have 5 years of a certain amount of experience on a production floor or in an adjacent industry environment. And so they wanted to leverage the badges as a way to de-risk that from the frontline recruitment process to say, you know what, these badges, we did an analysis with them of all of the skills bundled into certain badges. And upon review, many of those badges, if they had one or two, they met the minimum requirements for that role, meaning there's no reason not to move them along into the next part of the process, which was a phone screen interview. And so this is an example of, how this has really worked in an actual hiring environment. So now when one of our military connected candidates comes through and applies for a role and they see these badges, if it's a role that is already mapped to the competencies aligned within the badges, they can move forward into a phone screen interview. And so it creates a lot more visibility and access to their skills and to opportunity that they would have never normally had because they might have been hidden in that application process. And so that's one example of how we've made this work. There are many others. What we also have now is data. And so I'm not going to go too deep into it in the interest of time, but what we're really seeing is that for service members, all things being equal, those that get their skills translated and validated and represented in badges like ours are receiving significantly higher starting salaries from employers than those without verified and validated skills, whether it's one of our badges or someone else that has a badge in the military connected community. And what that is indicating to us is skills are now more visible and now they're more valued because employers see and understand and they're being matched to roles more commensurate with what they know and can do. And that's resulting in higher offering salaries. And that's important because one, they're being matched most likely to a role that's more commensurate with what they want to do. And it's a better living wage. And so that's going to impact retention as well. And they're going to be put in a role that's more commensurate with what they want to do moving forward. And so they're going to continue to be able to grow and develop in that role rather than being a part of that 45% that often churn within the first year because they weren't necessarily in the right role from the start.
Thank you for that explanation, for that example. It's really great to see how Map My Future is being worked on today. So that brings us to our Q&A section of this webinar. So the first one that we have in our comment, someone asked in someone, sorry, one comment in the chat noted that the value isn't just the badge itself, but the process of helping someone understand and articulate their own capabilities. How much of this work is be about creating credentials and how much is giving individuals the language and confidence to communicate their value?
I would say yes.
Oh, go ahead, Satis.
I would say as of now, it's the latter. There are lots and lots of credentials out there to varying degrees of value, but they still often rely on an employer or whoever is interpreting that resume to know exactly what's embedded inside of that credential, what competencies were demonstrated in order to be awarded that. And for unless it's required for a certain certification or license within industry, sometimes they're a nice to have and they're an added value, but much like military experience, sometimes the skills and competencies within a credential are also hidden. And so it does require manual work on the employer side to really know and understand, okay, what is that credential and what does it qualify you to do? And so that is a big problem. But the value of what we're currently doing and even any of the digital credentials or non-digital credentials that we're getting that build skills that we desperately need in manufacturing. What it does do is it gives individuals that earn that the language to communicate what they can do and to have better interviews, to put better content in their applications and on their resumes. And the credential then stands for this is the evidence of what I know and can do that's been validated by a trusted third party, whether it's a community and technical college, whether it's from the military, different things like that. So early indicators are it's giving people more confidence, especially for our military, our badges that we've developed at the Manufacturing Institute. It's really giving service members the tools and the language that they need to have the confidence that I do belong here. While I haven't done this in a manufacturing setting, I have done this in these three other contexts.
Yeah.
This is how I can perform this for your context. And so it's getting them to think differently of, oh, I wasn't just turning wrenches in the desert, on this piece of equipment. This is actually what I know and can do when it comes to maintenance and repair, and here's how I can perform that skill within your environment. So it really is that confidence piece. It's that self-awareness of how their skills translate and align, and that is just something that has been such a gap for so long and has required so much sort of manual soul searching and translation efforts on their part. When they're transitioning or looking for work, there are so many other stressors happening that a full comprehensive knowledge of what they can do, no one goes that deep. And so that's why I'm so excited about the potential of tools like this to really help mitigate some of that. And I'll pass it to Lauren.
Well, yeah. I mean, Satis, I think you did a great job really kind of summarizing that. I threw back up the skill badge detail slide for folks because we had to kind of quickly push through this one, but just to kind of give folks an understanding, I'm monitoring the chat a little bit too, and I saw Michelle Gifford's comment about the looking through that national database to validate credentials, and so this is when we were trying to address some of these things, right? Because not everything, not all credentials are created equal. Not all credentials are a somebody sat for a certification and received that credential, right? There's all of these different ways of looking at this. And so when we think about the work that we're doing on our end with the Manufacturing Institute, it's about, again, going back to what Sati said, making this information more relatable, more tangible for that person that is looking to see how what they did over here can translate to over here. And so ways that we've kind of taken this on to the comment earlier is beyond putting this information on the screen when they're going in and they're actually claiming those badges and getting this information, is we put together a companion, a Map My Future companion that allows an individual to kind of go have a dialogue with a chat bot, right? And say, hey, here's why I'm at the site today. What am I supposed to do once I'm here? What do I do with this information once I have it? And so it's helping them get smarter on what they're coming and actually engaging with. So, okay, great, I have this workplace safety badge. What does that mean? Well, here's how you can talk about what workplace safety means for you as the individual. Tell me more about yourself, and I can help even make it stronger for you. So it helps again give them the confidence to see like, oh, okay, this isn't hallucinating. Somebody didn't just come and tell me I have workplace safety and I don't actually have it. It's no, I do have it. I just never thought about it in that context because it wasn't necessarily the way I was looking at my military service, the way that I was trying to capture what I did and what I know and can do. So just another little bit of detail associated with that.
Thanks. And building off of Michelle's comment, like how close are we to having a common skills language that employers can rely on regardless of where someone gained those skills?
Satish, do you want to talk to the manufacturing side of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting everyone to agree on one taxonomy, one common language is very, very difficult. Some of the things that we are doing within the Institute is really working directly with employers, especially for some of those harder to fill, more like high demand technical roles, to say, let's level set on what the foundational skill requirements are to be successful or hired on day one for this role, and what are those things that are built over time, honed and built and trained on over time? And then where is their alignment? We have a lot of different, I'll use the technician, manufacturing technician, maintenance technician, kind of occupation as an example. There are a lot of different job titles that sort of roll up under different types of technician roles within manufacturing. Some specialize more in robotics, some are more on the electrical, mechanical side of things, some are a multi-skilled technician. There's not always alignment on exactly how we're titling everything and what skills. And so we're really working on our end to sort of level set and come up with a common sort of skills profile of what do we mean by this, and these are the requirements, so that we can then better map and align military experience back to those more high value linchpin type of roles, so that we can create more pathways into those opportunities, because we know our military community has that experience that we need. And even if they're 80% of the way there, 70% of the way there, they can be upskilled into those roles at a much faster rate if we know exactly where the skill gaps are. And so that's some of the way that we're trying to address that. But it is difficult. There's not necessarily one centralized like national database that does everything. That would be so lovely if there was. So you kind of have to piece some of that together. But there are some really helpful tools that Lauren had mentioned previously, and that she might be able to touch on now really quickly.
Yeah, just I threw a link in the chat. We talked a little bit briefly about the MillGears tool, millgears.osd.mil. We've got a lot of different partners on the call today that have great tools and platforms that they're pulling together to try to address a lot of the challenges that exist. I think starting again with that military connected population, but knowing full well that what we're learning with this population transcends and can be replicated, maybe with some minor changes to support other populations as well. So I threw up a resource slide on the screen. These QR codes will allow you to go to the Map My Future site. And then, as I mentioned, I dropped the millgears.osd.mil link in the chat as well for folks to check out MillGears if you want to get in there. There's a variety of different tools. Satis and I are also available if anyone wants to reach out after to talk about anything we talked about today, and provide a demo, or help you understand how to use this. I know in the chat, Satis, Johnny asked about how much change management is needed for the eligibility grid to be implemented within talent acquisition, and you've taken that one on head first. So I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Lots of blood, sweat, and tears there. No, I think this is a newer concept, right? And one of the things that I've been working diligently on is within the technology that all of you use to evaluate talent, whether it's your ATS system, like a Workday, to actually be able to ingest the metadata that lives inside of these digital badges and credentials. And it's not just ours. There's 1.9 million digital credentials out in the market. And so being able to have tech systems ingest that data so that it can be used as a part of your evaluation, it takes that manual process out of it. From a change management perspective, I always go at this with employers as what are your major challenges when it comes to connecting or getting military talent through your pipelines, and really identifying where some of the breakdowns are, and then coming up with some solutions where our work can help solve for that. It's not difficult once you identify a couple of key roles and we take a look at what each of the badges we have, what they signal, what competencies had to be demonstrated to earn that badge. They map really well to a lot of the minimum qualifications for many foundational roles in manufacturing. So it really just takes, from a change management perspective, identifying a key business challenge and problem that needs solving for, and then really thinking through, how do these align to, certain roles within our organization, and then communicating to everyone across the talent ecosystem within your organization what you're doing and why, and creating that buy-in. And that does take time. It takes leadership at many levels to get there, but it's worth it. And so I encourage all of you to reach out to me, reach out to Lauren, and we're happy to kind of walk you through that, and start setting that up within your own organization.
Thank you so much, Satis. We are at time, so I just want to thank both Satis and Lauren for taking the time out of your day to speak with us and help us understand our workforce a little more. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We'll share the recording and the resources we mentioned. And I hope everybody has a great Friday and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.